Okay, let me continue with your week 13, guys. Okay. So meron tayong power interaction. And so you have here summarizing data. Okay. Using your measures of position, we have standard deviation, or we have your standard normal distribution and correlation analysis. For your standard deviation, pag sinabi kasi natin standard or standardized score, this expresses the distance from the mean of a single score, just as the standard deviation represents the spread of scores around the mean for entire data set. So a standardized score represents the distance of a single point from the mean. This distance is represented by the standard deviation so that the standard scores could be computed across the variables. And even if, for example, the scale of measurement is radically different from this time. For a standard normal distribution, it has a mean of 0, okay, and a standard deviation of 1. This transformed distribution retains to its original shape, and the z-scores could be used to determine which percentile a given score would fall. And this kind of analysis is helpful in determining the probability that an individual score would fall in a specific place or distribution. And distributions with a bell shape have approximately, of course, a percentage in that. So we will not tackle that kasi baka mag-split kayo. We have here standard or summarizing scores, or using scores using measures of relationship. The correlation analysis should be under summarizing scores using measures of relationship. The correlation analysis is a measure that depicts the strength of the correlation between two variables, and it examines the values of two variables in relation to each other. And this type of analysis could be used to examine or it could be used between single variable in two samples. Okay. Correlation statistics could be shown both numerically and or in graphic forms. The notation of yung tinatawag nating RH or rho or the R, okay, is used to represent a bivariate correlation in a sample. So again, correlation analysis should be under summarizing data using measures of relationship. Okay. Sorry for that one. Okay. So this could be an example of your standard deviations, percentile ranks, Z-scores, or standardized scores, or your scale scores. And this could be as an example of um your other your line graph, your box plot, and the scatter plot. So nauna yung example, guys. I'm so sorry for that one. Okay. Summarizing data in graphical presentations. Okay, so it's just as important as the other topics that we have to use the correct graphical technique as it is to use to the correct or graphical technique, or parang pareho lang. You use the correct statistical technique and the correct graphical technique, I should say, to summarize descriptive data. In some ways, graphical presentation of data is easier to understand because the data are presented in summary fashion with colors, lines, and shapes, and the graph highlighting differences and similarities in the data. We have talked about this line graph, and line graphs by comparison are used to show change over time, and values for a variable are summarized by period of time using the mean, and each period is followed by a defined time frame. So for you as a student, so you only have to memorize this one. You also have your box plot. It provides, of course, a good method to show, particularly when a variable is measured in different groups. Okay. You also have here your scatter plots that requires graphing two variables measured from the same subject at the same time and show the nature of the relationship between these two variables. And when all data in the set have been plotted, the graph shows whether the points are closely grouped or associated, or scattered, or no association, or no correlation. So the closer the dots are forming in a discernible straight line, the more tightly associated with the variables to one another. So mas madali maintindihan yung correlation, okay? So this could be an example of line graph. Okay, the box plot. Okay, line graph, the box plot, and your scatter plot. Okay. Ayan. The common errors in summarizing descriptive data. of course, the most elementary error is made when an inappropriate statistic is used to summarize data. For example, a mean should never be calculated for race, gender, or other categorical data. However, those researchers who are new on statistical analysis may forget that these levels of measurement and seeing numbers on the screen run descriptive analysis, okay? Although a statistical analysis computer package will certainly, for example, calculate the mean when provided are corrected, or it could give you correct commands, the resulting number is meaningless. So wag kayo magko-compute ng mean sa race, gender, or other categorical data. You also have here what we call as incorrectly entered data. Okay. Syempre pag mali na yung data, mali na lahat. Selected data presented without the context of the whole data set. So you have to be very careful, okay, of these erroneous calculations or conclusions that could be drawn about the variables if the data presented without the benefit of seeing all, of course, the um, ano to, appropriate data set of descriptive statistics, okay? Selected data are lack of disclosure of frequency and percentage information, or over interpretation of the results. So yun lang din. Yung tinatawag kasi nating error in the interpretation of descriptive data is the over interpretation of results of, or in other words, yung researcher, ininterpret niya yung data in a way that goes beyond what statistics were intended to reflect. So, sinobrahan niya. The problem is most common with the correlation coefficient. And although yung correlation coefficient is an excellent way to represent the strength of or the direction of relationship between two variables, it is limited to description of that relationship. Because the variables are measured simultaneously, the researcher could not draw conclusions about causality. And of course, it is uncommon, however, for a researcher to interpret a strong correlation as evidence that one variable has an effect or causes in some way influences the other. Another one is when a researcher has a good command or a statistical technique, it could be tempting to represent or to present data in complicated ways that are so sophisticated enough to amaze a fellow researcher. So medyo sinobrahan lang niya to, again, ano to, para, alam mo yun, medyo magyabang sa fellow researchers. However, the point of reporting descriptive analysis is to inform, not to impress, okay? It's to inform, not to impress the reader. Of course, you have to take note that the readers of research that is intended as evidence for nursing practice are generally practitioners, not statisticians. So, marami sa atin, hindi natin naiintindihan masyado ang statistics, and it's okay because we are not, again, most of us do not like numbers, okay? If the write-up requires the help of a statistician to interpret the result in this section, then the author has not presented the findings well. So kailangan, if for example, if you know that you don't know how to do the statistical computation, and it's okay for you to look for a statistician to do the honor, okay? Descriptive data should be provided in the most common uncomplicated fashion that accurately and completely represents the findings, so that the understanding and application to practice are maximized. And the final pitfall to avoid in presenting data graphically in a way that hides important aspects of the dataset. And this type of error is generally unintentional, but it could be, or it could limit the understanding of the reader of the research results. For example, pag nagpakita lang tayo ng mean values, okay, that will hide the distribution of the variable. Pwedeng mag-create yung researcher ng different types of charts then to determine which one better displays the meaning of the data. Pwede rin ganon. Parang tingin lang tayo kung anong mas magandang way to represent the data that the reader could readily understand. And the best way to report descriptive data analysis is the most accurate, complete, and understandable way, and that is not easily misinterpreted. So wag nating sosobrahan. And that is for week 13.